Okay, we're going to go ahead and formally start this program. Thank you again for being here. My name is Rose Gerber. I'm the Director of Patient Advocacy and Education for COA, and we bring you these educational webinars to keep you updated on current topics as well as share some of COA's policy issues. And in terms of current issues, right now I'm happy to share that May is National Clinical Trials Month. So those of you who have been participants in the chat know that when May rolls around, it's a fantastic opportunity for us to shine the light on our community practices and the important work that is being done in these practices related to clinical trials. Excuse me. Now, I know that many of you that were on this call were at the recent COA conference, and you may recall that the theme for the conference was innovation in practice. And we were talking about AI in the cancer care arena and a lot of other important issues like CAR-T therapy and just on and on about all the advances that are taking place in cancer care. When we talk about innovation, we want to take a step back and realize that community oncology practices have always been at the forefront of innovation, and that starts with clinical trials. And today, I'm so happy that we have an expert in this field, Dr. Siu-Long Yao from the Medical Director of Clinical Research at Astera Cancer Care in New Jersey. And I got a sneak peek of his presentation. It's fantastic. So stick around, and it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Yao to you. Dr. Yao, take it away. We all look forward to learning from you today.
All right, Rose, thank you for that nice introduction to my little talk here. So thanks everyone for being here. I just want to start with something that might sound a little philosophical, but it's actually a clinical argument. And that is, I hope by the end of this talk, you'll agree with me that providing care, research is a way of providing excellent care for our patients. So the thesis is this: clinical research isn't just a side activity we do on top of taking care of patients. It is taking care of patients. And that's the framing I want to hold throughout this whole presentation. The quote on the right side of the slide captures this directly. The idea is that because clinical research serves as a cornerstone for delivering equitable, high-fidelity care, every doctor should consider it a fundamental obligation of medical practice. So that's just not a motivational statement, and I'm going to show you the data behind it. So next slide.
The reason why I see that what you feel confident.
Excuse me for a moment. I'm hearing some background audio.
Yeah, no, I think it's coming from me, unfortunately. I'll try to speak directly into this.
Okay. All right. Okay, we're going to all listen. Okay.
So on the right side of the slide here, you'll see the roadmap for today. We've got 4 sections that I want to go over, starting with efficacy, and that is looking at survival outcomes in clinical trials and what the data actually tells us about why trial participants do better. Then we'll go to an unmet needs section, and specifically, I want to talk about time toxicity and geographic distance as real quantifiable clinical risks there. They're not just soft barriers, but they're clinical risks. Section 4 is safety and how protocolized care actually mitigates the fragmentation that causes harm in routine practice. And finally, we'll close with clinical perspective, which is about equity, access, and what accreditation bodies are now formally requiring of us. So next slide.
Okay. And do they also...
So this section is about validating the protocol-driven care model. And the core question is simple. Do patients who enroll in clinical trials do better? And if so, why? And the answer to the first question is yes. And the why, well, that's what's interesting.
Yeah.
So next slide.
Yeah.
So before we get to the outcomes, I want to make sure we're all oriented to the design structure of a clinical trial, because I think it matters for interpreting everything else that follows. So this is a standard randomized clinical trial scheme or layout. Follow it from left to right. You start with your study population, which goes through a screening phase, and those who qualify get randomized. That's the dice icon in the middle. And from there, patients are allocated to one of 2 arms shown on the right, the study drug arm at the top, or the placebo active treatment or standard care arm at the bottom. Both arms are then followed and outcomes are measured. So this isn't true for every clinical trial. There are many different types of clinical trial design, but I'm just going to focus on this, because we have a limited time today, and I just want to bring you up to speed on some of the going on in the field. So what I want to hold in your mind is that this design produces something really, really important when you have this type of a design. And that is that there's 100% protocol-driven uniformity. That is, every patient, regardless of which arm they're in, is receiving care that has been systematically defined, monitored, and enforced. So keep that in your back pocket because it becomes the crux of the argument in the next few slides. Next slide. Okay, so now here's a point that I think gets underappreciated. When we talk about clinical trials, people often focus on the investigational arm or the test arm. But look at what's happening in the control arm. So in this slide. So the table on the bottom of this slide contrasts the investigational trial therapy on the left with routine clinical care on the right. And you can run your eyes down the 3 rows. In trials, there's a global expert consensus. So in routine care, there is individual provider preference. In trials, there is routine multi-agency monitoring, and in routine care, there is standard institutional oversight. In trials, there are protocol mandated dose modifications, and in routine, there's more of an ad hoc clinical adjustment. So the last box summarizes it. 100% protocol-driven uniformity in clinical trials. Even your control arm patients are receiving a treatment regimen that has been vetted extensively by regulatory and clinical experts. This is not what just happens in routine practice, and this is important. That difference can have survival consequences. So next slide. So what am I talking about here? So let's look at some data. The plot on the right is something called a forest plot. On the x-axis of this plot, there's something called a hazard ratio ranging from 0.1 to 10. And the vertical dashed line at 1 is your line of no effect. So for example, in a clinical trial or any type of analysis of clinical data, if the box on the right falls right on that dotted line, that means there's no effect. If the box falls to the left of that dotted line, going up and down, it means that it favors the treatment. If it falls to the right of that dotted line, it means it favors the comparator or the comparison arm. So what you're looking at here is a meta-analysis or an analysis, accumulated analysis of many studies. But you can see that when you look across many of these studies, most of those squares are sitting on the left side of 1.0, which means that it's favoring participation in a clinical trial as for overall survival. Now, focus on the left side. I tried to summarize this for you on the left side. Basically, the overall pooled hazard ratio across all studies was 0.76. That's just a fancy way of saying that when you combine all the studies together and look at how much of a benefit you get, there was a 24% reduction in the chance of dying. That's a pretty substantial amount. So second, in the high quality studies, so that's just the raw results. So what the authors of this meta-analysis or analysis of many studies did was they tried to try to do more adjustment, more statistical adjustment. And even when you do more statistical adjustment, you're still, the hazard ratio or the favor is 0.91, which means there's still a 9% chance of greater survival when you participate in a clinical trial than not. I do want to point out, just to be honest, that 9% benefit is a smaller benefit, and it's not as statistically robust and significant as the 0.76 or 24% benefit, but it's still in the right direction. So the main point is, in the last bullet there, that when the authors looked even closer, and I haven't shown all the data for that, when you look even closer, the benefits are driven by uniformity, protocol-enforced treatment systems and not by the drug that the new drug that they're testing. Basically, they took, for example, patients even allocated or put in with standard therapy, and they looked at how they did, and they did significantly better than patients who received that standard therapy off of a clinical trial. So next slide. So moving into section 3, I'm going to talk about time toxicity and geographic distances here, and how it's not, those are not just inconveniences, but they have quantifiable risks associated with them. So next slide. So this slide presents a patient case, and I want to walk through it carefully because I think it's a good illustration of the systemic barriers that we're talking about here. On the left side of the slide, you have the patient care overview. Patient case overview. Sorry, this is a 58-year-old female diagnosed with diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, and her nearest, center of excellence requires a 4-hour round trip. So what's the logistical consequence? Of course, there's going to be unavoidable missed employment. There's going to be childcare disruption if the person is young. There's going to be fatigue. And those aren't just soft social factors. They actually do affect the outcomes. And I'll show you that in the subsequent slide. So the diagram on the right lays it out for you spatially. Her home is on the left. Her local clinic is just below. The center of excellence, the place where optimal care lives, is all the way to the right. And there's a red barrier drawn across the path labeled 4-hour transit barrier. So that's not just metaphorical. It represents a real reduction in her probability of receiving the care she needs because of all these barriers. So the paradigm shift, which I want you to think about is, and this is what decentralized trials infrastructure really does in the community practice, is that it brings the expert consensus care model. So that model of a protocol, which involved many people looking at it and many centers, these centers of excellence all agreeing, along with all the community center, agreeing that that's the best treatment for a patient. It brings it all to the local site so that you don't have to move the patient to the protocol, you move the protocol to the patient. So the takeaways at the bottom here: clinical research can serve as a primary delivery mechanism for providing optimized local care. Next slide. So this is a little bit of a complicated slide, but I think it's a very important point. So the scatter plot on the left shows weekly healthcare contact days as a percentage on the y-axis, plotted against time from diagnosis on the x-axis. So 0 on the bottom is the time of diagnosis, and 1 is the end of life for a patient. The orange curve is the smooth trend. What you see is a U-shape. Early after diagnosis, healthcare contact is high, around 28 to 30% of the days. And over time, it dips through the middle of the illness course. And then as you approach the right side of the x-axis towards the end of life, it climbs sharply again, back up towards the 35 to 40% area. The highlighted text box in the middle of the chart tells you 20 to 30% of final days are spent interacting with healthcare systems. For patients with advanced cancer, those days are not for getting better. Those days are days spent in transit and waiting rooms and managing logistics. So the 3 callouts on the right quantify this further. There's quantifiable time toxicity, severely impacting quality of life, rural travel times averaging up to 120 minutes per round trip, and nearly 40% of chronic disease patients report that this is unsustainable burden for them. So that's not just a patient satisfaction issue, it's a clinical risk factor. And I'll get into that in the next slide. Next slide. So here's some of the outcome data to support that. So this table has 4 columns. The first column is cancer type, cohort size, travel metric, and clinical impact. So look at the rows here. For breast cancer, where they had a cohort of 1,071 patients, living more than 20 kilometers from a hospital was associated with an increased risk of late-stage diagnosis. So the relative risk was 21.25 per additional 30 kilometers. That means a 25% increased risk for every 30 kilometers further that you had to travel. For rectal cancer, which had a much larger patient group of 6,848, every additional 100 kilometers of distance that you had to travel was associated with a 6% increase in the risk of death. And for DLBC, diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, which is the patient that we had talked about initially as our example case, patients that lived in small or medium urban settings where they had to travel to large centers had a 40% increased risk of dying compared to patients that did not have to do that type of travel. So basically now, just like, we have other factors that we consider when whether someone is healthy enough to get treatment, distance can be considered one important factor that determines, how likely you are to benefit from treatment overall. So next slide. So what's the solution? So this slide makes a structural argument as to how we can try to solve some of this challenge. So the map on the left shows a network radiating outward from a center of excellence in the center of the country. And the arrows flow outward to regional hospitals and community oncology clinics across the country. So the arrows represent the direction care can travel, not from patients to institutions, but from a center of excellence to patients. So the two bullets on the right frame it for you there. Community and regional institutions are equipped to deliver the quality of research found at centers of excellence, and decentralized research brings the rigor directly to where patients live. So the data point in the blue box at the bottom deserves special attention, and that is 77% of current clinical trials now occur in the community setting. So these trials are available, and they're available in the community where you can get treated and not have to travel far to a center of excellence, for example. So if you exclude the 20 largest hospitals and centers of excellence in the United States, actually 85% of trials are community based. So this isn't a future vision, it's already happening. The infrastructure is there. The question is whether we're using it. So next slide. So let me give you some evidence that community settings can deliver equivalent outcomes when you have clinical trials in place or protocols in place. So this was a retrospective cohort study of stage 3-4 non-small cell lung cancer patients. And you can see on the right side, you have that forest plot again, where the dotted line shows no difference between the comparisons. And here you have it shows overall survival across 3 groups in this study. This was a study combining many studies in lung cancer to look at the effect of various things. Here you have the male cohort at the top, an academic community cohort in the middle, and a curative intent sensitivity analysis at the bottom. And that's just limiting to patients that had a chance for cure. So again, the dashed vertical line is again at 1, but you can see for male patients, treatment in the community compared to treatment at an academic center or center of excellence, the hazard ratio was 0.99, which means that if you were treated in the community on a protocol, you were 1%, you had a 1% lower risk of dying compared to being treated at a major medical center, academic medical center. VHA refers to the VA health system there. It's the point estimate's a little bit higher, but still you can see the line there represents the uncertainty. So the actual estimate could fall anywhere within that dark line, still overlapping with the academic or center of excellence. for the comparison where you're comparing the academic and community analysis overall, not just in male patients, the hazard ratio or the ratio was 0.98, which means that you're 2% better survival in the community setting compared to the academic or center of excellence. And the bottom line just shows no significant difference in overall survival according to the for people with curative lung cancer. So next slide. So here's some more data to support that hypothesis. Basically, in this study, they looked at what happens when you compare the centers and the patients with leukemia. And leukemia is a much more complicated cancer to treat, and it requires much more advanced technology, and the patients are much more sicker. So this was obviously a place to look to see if there would be a difference. So this was a multi-center study of older adults, age 60 and over, with acute myeloid leukemia, and it looked at 1,170 patients across a phase 3 intensive chemotherapy trials. So the survival curve is shown in the middle, and you can see here the y-axis represents the percent without the event. In other words, 100 means 100% survival. And the x-axis going across the bottom is time out to 38 months. The blue curve is the community practice result, and the gray line is the academic result for survival after treatment. And you can see they're basically overlapping. They're superimposed on top of each other. In fact, the hazard ratio is 1.04. And it's not statistically significant, meaning that there's essentially no difference whether you got treated in an academic medical center or in a community practice if you had leukemia. So the conclusion basically is that from these two, this is, I've just pulled out two major studies, but there's a lot of studies, as was shown in that meta-analysis slide earlier. Basically, that if you get treated in the academic or community settings on a protocol where you don't have much choice as to what to do, the protocol specifies exactly what needs to be done and when it needs to be done. There's no difference where you get treated because the directions are all the same. The treatment's all the same. And that's the main point I want to make here. Next slide.
Dr. Yao, this,
Yep.
this one. So then, I mean, all the slides so far are so important, and this is consistent thing that there's protocols, there's scientific rigor, and you're going to get outstanding settings. And going back to your time toxicity, and that really matters for the patient on so many levels. And so this is seeing this in this format is so valuable to all of us.
Yes, no, I think, you know, over time, as I've learned about, you know, I've had an interest in clinical research, but over time, I think there's been more and more data coming out on how critical clinical research. It's not really just research. It's also a way like you know, that of providing care and providing excellent care. So, okay, next slide. So now I'm going to move into section 4, which is the safety argument. And so this section is about something that I think that we don't talk enough about in our own practice, and that is what is the harm that comes from care fragmentation. And this care fragmentation, I think, may explain, I mean, you know, is something that we need to keep an eye on, and having a protocol where the directions are laid out can minimize or decrease this care fragmentation, where, you know, if you have to transfer from one doctor to another, you know, each doctor might have their own way of treating things. But on a protocol, they don't have that choice. So they have to follow the directions. So next slide. So this slide addresses the vulnerability that is actually particularly relevant at academic centers where you have medical students, interns, residents, and even attendings that rotate services every month, for example. This table here shows all-cause in-hospital mortality. In other words, your chances of dying in the hospital from all causes for 3 types of transitions. So there's an intern, so that is on a team that's taking care of you, only the intern switches, or resident only. For the team that's taking care of you, only the resident is switching. And then the intern plus resident combined. Both intern and resident happen to be switching at the same time. There's 4 columns there. There's a transition type, the mortality rate in transition patients, the mortality rate in the control patients, and the odds ratio, which is just the ratio and the p-value, just whether it's significant or not. So if you have only the intern switching on your team, your risk of dying was 3.5%, versus if no intern switching occurred during the observation period, where the risk of dying is 2%. So here, the p-value, usually a p-value of less than 0.05 is very highly significant. So you can see that it's down to 0.008, which is very, very significant. If you had both the intern and the resident switch together, your mortality or your risk of death was 4%, versus if you did not have them switch, that's 2.1%. So this is a study, it's a large study. It was in 230,701 patients across 10 medicine practices. And so why is this important? So this is, as I mentioned, in a clinical trial, you don't have the switching because everybody has to follow the same directions and everybody knows what's coming next, and everybody knows what to do. So this, one hope would be that clinical trials would be able to reduce this handoffs and inconsistency. So next slide. So here's some data to back that up. So on the right side of the slide, you have a bar chart showing clinical care coordination. It's measured by the CCI index. So the y-axis runs from 0 to 90 and represents the CCI score. And the x-axis has 4 categories. There's the total care coordination, communication as part of that section of care coordination, navigation, and operations. And each category has 2 bars. So the dark navy bar is the clinical trial participants, and the gray bar is the non-trial participants. And you can see in every case, clinical trial participants felt that there was more coordination in their care compared to those that did not participate in a clinical trial. And that the p-value here, again, a measure of how significant it is very, very low. It's 0.0008, which is far lower than 0.05. So the 3 bullets on the left tell you some of the mechanisms. Basically, the predefined treatment roadmaps, as we discussed, eliminate ad hoc clinical variation. The validated CCI assessments confirm superior systemic navigation. And this is worth noting, these psychological and operational benefits are observed independently of mortality incomes, meaning that even setting aside the survival data, patients in trials just experience better coordinated care. And that's a good quality of care argument, separate from the efficacy argument or the survival argument. So next slide. So I'll try to move through this quickly. So basically, the next few slides, I just want to go over equity, access, and accreditation importance of clinical trials. Next slide. So this table on the left shows patient characteristics, specifically Black African Americans and Latino Hispanic patients. And they're broken down by high research engagement settings, where a lot of research is done by a site, versus low research engagement settings. And you can see for the Black African American patients, 11.2% representation in high research environments, but actually more patients are in the low research environments, and 12.6%. For Latino Hispanic patients, something similar, only 6.8% in high research settings, and many more patients, unfortunately, in 11.6% in low research settings. So this means that the communities with the least access to research-driven care are the ones who are disproportionately served by the low research environments. And the patients who stand to benefit the most from decentralized trial structure, unfortunately, are the ones least likely to receive it at the present time. So the bullet points on the right reinforce the practice dimension. Here you can see clinical trial participation. What are the benefits for these populations? They can offset costs not covered by insurance, or they can provide full coverage for uninsured patients. Many trials and reimburse transportation, meals, lodging, and reducing indirect financial barriers. And because 77% of clinical trials are in the community, this is a great way to reduce the disparity in healthcare for our patients. So next slide. So here's the institutional mandate. Actually, it now has progressed so that the American College of Surgeons Commission on Cancer now requires clinical trial accrual as a condition of accreditation. So it's on the left side of the slide, beneath the accreditation seal, you can see it's not an aspiration, it's now a requirement. So next slide.
That's great news for all patients.
Yeah, next slide. So this is my summary slide. I see I'm running close to the clock here. Basically, there's 3 columns here. There's better survival odds, safer, more coordinated care, and care closer to home. So under survival, trial participants may survive longer, independent of which treatment arm they receive. There's protocol-driven uniformity outperforms individual clinical judgment alone, and community oncology can deliver outcomes that match the best centers of excellence. I hope I've convinced you somewhat of that. Under safety, standardized protocols eliminate variation between providers. You saw that when there's a handoff, the mortality or the chance of death increases in an academic setting. Participation on a clinical trial may minimize that because the protocol is standardized. Trial participants also report significantly better care coordination across every measurement that there was. Under access, geographic distance is a proven mortality risk. The further away you live, the less you have chance of surviving. And clinical trials can bring that expert care locally. So decentralized trials will eliminate the time toxicity, and participation can also offset the disparity in healthcare with financial barriers for underinsured and marginalized patients. So next slide. So I'll just end with this slide. This is Astera's mission, guided by experts, driven by science, focused on you. And I hope that you can also see that really coincides with what we're trying to do with clinical research here at Astera and clinical trials. It's basically what a good clinical protocol delivers. There's expert consensus care reviewed by regulatory authorities, by academic institutions, and by local community practices. They all agree that that's the best way to treat the patient, and they all come up with the protocol together. And the patient is it's all driven by science in the consensus, and the patient is at the center of every decision. So thank you for your attention. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Dr. Yao. That was fantastic. I'm very passionate about clinical trials personally and professionally. I shared on the Herceptin clinical trial. So everything that you just did for us was extremely informative, fantastic, very clear slides, showed all the rigor that goes into clinical trials. And I do want to remind the audience that we will have the video and Dr. Yao's slides available as early as a day or two, or no later than a week from now. They'll be on COA's website, as well as on our YouTube page and possibly on Facebook Live as well. So thank you. And also, as you can see, Dr. Yao is from Astera Cancer Care. They're one of our community practices, and I encourage you to go to their website and you can learn a little bit more about Dr. Yao. And there is also a nice research tab. And you can see a couple of very nice videos. And there's one video in particular for anyone who might want to hear the patient's viewpoints as well. I believe the patient's name was Barry, and it's a very wonderful video about this patient's experience on a clinical trial at Astera. And in addition to all the science, I know as patients, what matters most to all of us is just feeling hope that you have a future. And I know that through the combination of people like yourself, Dr. Yao, the clinical research experts, combined with the oncologist and the oncology care team, that there is hope for all of us cancer patients and survivors. So thank you so much. And we have one last slide before we part ways. Thank you again to our participants. Once again to Dr. Yao, the Medical Director of Clinical Research at Astera Cancer Care. And also thank you to Eisai, Johnson & Johnson, and Pharmacentra for helping us provide you with this education through COA's Patient Advocacy Network. Thank you and have a great rest of your day and week. Thank you again, Dr. Yao.